Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's Talk Consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today in the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about the proactive practice of mind control, also called Yama in Kriya Yoga, as an exercise to purify thought. Listen as we explain the difference between sowing to the flesh and sowing to the spirit. Divide and conquer before uniting and standing. In this show, we will discuss the function of the mind-body complex and the realization of the divine principle of oneness. Faithful and orderly with the objects of sense makes consciousness receptive to the deeper things of spiritual awareness. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and live in spiritual truth. Swami, the title of today's show is Consciously Converting False to Real. What does that look like for us?
Yeah, we really want to focus on this idea of methodology, how to develop a spiritual practice that will give you some kind of results. And the reason you don't want to use or totally rely on the mental material means is because they are dualistic and therefore unreal. The mental material universe is in constant change, and it is temporary and finite. Only spirit is changeless, whole, complete, and eternal. So when we change finite bad to finite good, there's chronic anxiety that comes with the temporary seeming solution. Only spirit is self-existent power. And when you are looking for the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, only spirit will do. The idea of consciously converting everything back to spiritual truth becomes an exercise we employ to induce the God experience.
Swami, let's start explaining the difference between sowing to the flesh and sowing to the spirit.
Yeah, here in Kriya Yoga, we work with the physical body and with the idea of mind control. The yamas in yoga, they translate into self-control and self-mastery. Because like we say, we must be faithful and orderly with the objects of sense in order to be receptive to the deeper things of the divine principle. And what's visible and tangible, even though we know now that it's not real, it's a mental image, we also know that the more divinely mental, the more harmonious and indestructible it will appear. So what is appearing in your material senses is now looked as the check engine light on the dashboard of consciousness. Consciousness is experience, and the true consciousness is the true health. We'll start with what we call the physics of spirituality, which becomes like attracts like, and two things can't occupy the same space at the same time. Now, we incarnate into a mortal form, which is individualized by the world mind. And as long as we draw from or believe in the false mental material universe, life seems to die. The practice of sowing to the spirit must be developed in order to come out of the false sense of existence into the truth of being, out of the tomb of the many into the light of the one life. See, underlying matter is energy, and underlying energy is the void. Void because it's invisible and intangible to corporeal sense. So there's a lot of things that must be in place for us to really start to see we really don't have to convert the mental material universe into spirit. It already is spirit. What we have to do is master the mental material concept and then put it off. And in doing that, we reveal the true creation.
Can we talk about more on this tomb and how can we recognize ourselves when we are in the tomb?
Yeah, I think to go over some of this, we have a soundbite from Herb Fitch, Realization of Oneness 14a. And if anybody's interested in the full audio file, you can get this at mysticalprinciples.com, and I'll play it.
The body of Lazarus was governed by the mind of the world. It had a heart. It had lungs. It had organs. These organs could no longer function. They were not God-governed. And yet a new body appeared, seemingly like the first. Your heart, your lungs, your bodily organs are not God-governed. And yet there is a body there which is God-governed. A body which, even though the human sense of body stands before you, there is a body present which does not depend on the activity of the heart or of the lungs. It does not depend on breathing or blood pumping through you. That body must be lived in. It cannot be lived in while you live in this body. You cannot live in two bodies, but you can live in your real body. It is a matter of purification, a purification of the Lazarus consciousness, the creature consciousness, the willingness to put the old consciousness in the tomb, to step out of it. And this means a denial in consciousness of all that is not God created. If God didn't create it, for you it cannot have true existence. If you continue to believe in the existence of that which God did not create, you're not putting Lazarus, the false consciousness, in the tomb. You can't hold out anything. It's a complete and total relinquishing of the false mortal consciousness. Mortality does not exist. Now, if Lazarus had no real human body, because God created none, what perceived that body? The mind of Lazarus, and the mind of those who witnessed Lazarus. If a mind perceives what God did not create, that mind is not only in a state of falseness, but there is no such mind. God could not create a mind to perceive what does not exist. The mind perceiving Lazarus, the mind perceiving mortal form, is non-existent. The activities of the mortal form perceived by the mind need not concern you. If you can lift yourself to the place where you know that that which I see, that which I experience from the mortal viewpoint, is in a mind, and that mind is no more present than the body of Lazarus was. That mind is no more present than the body it perceives. The mind is no more present than the conditions of matter that it experiences. If I can take this world and see it as an activity in my mind, I can look out at all that happens in this world, knowing it happens only in the mind that has no existence. And so you develop habits of living, in which you look at matter, form, the activity of matter and form, the sensations of matter and form, the motion of matter and form, the size, weight, and seeming substance of matter and form, and you know it to be an activity of mind, and you know that mind to be non-existent. And when you can rest there, free of the activity of that mind, you are taking the world and putting it in the tomb. You're taking the Lazarus consciousness of the world, the false state of body, false state of mind, the false perceptions of that mind, the total material form and its material lifespan. And you're saying God is life, and life never becomes lifespans. God is life, and life never becomes sick. God is life, and life never deteriorates. God is life, and life never becomes blind or deaf. God is life, and life is never lacking or limited. That which I perceive as lack or limitation or death or sickness or disease or any form of mortality, any form of bad mortality, any form of sinning mortality, any form of limited mortality, and any form of good mortality. That is perceived in a mind which has no existence. I can rest there, for the mind of the Father can only come to express where I stand when I have died to the false mind. Then Christ draws near, then Christ says, come forth, then the immortal self is revealed. Then the conditions, unlike God's creation, which never existed except in the mind that perceived them, are shown to be false and non-existent. We learn, as Shakespeare said, nothing's either good or bad, but thinking makes it so.
I like what Herb says when he says, God is life and life never becomes lifespans. God is life and life never becomes sick. God is life and life never deteriorates. I really like that because he's saying we have to get out of that false state of mind in order to come to that realization.
Yeah, and then where he says, when you can rest there free of the activity of that mind, you are taking the world and putting it in the tomb. See, this is exactly what Gilbert Carpenter said, a thing divinely and scientifically natural for one whose thought has been freed from the influence of the mortal mind. And we really have to understand exactly what is this going to look like when I'm doing it? What does it look like when I put off the old man? When this false sense of self is dead, not just dead, but dead and buried. Because like Herb tells us here, then Christ says, come forth. Then the immortal self is revealed. So there is a prerequisite here. We have to put off the old man before the Christ, the eternal principle that will make the divine creation comprehensive to human consciousness will even approach us. This is where I think a lot of what we brought to the table with the Kriya Yoga becomes very helpful, because we're used to working with Yama and Niyama. We're used to working with control, self-mastery, thought control. And also we're accustomed to enlisting techniques, the observances, purification, purifying ourselves physically, mentally, conceptually, because you create this hospitable environment. In silence and in stillness, you invite the divine creative mind into your awareness. And this idea of stop thinking, start knowing. Then the next octave of that is where it's no longer just a technique or a practice. It becomes a demonstrable principle. Spirit is a present help. It's right here. It's right now, and it's functioning. But we must be conscious of it in order to activate it in experience.
Interesting that you said that, because I was going to say something similar, because we've been talking a lot about if you are experiencing lack and limitation, then we don't know God aright. And that last sentence from Herb is, God is life and life is never lacking or limited. It's something I think we really need to pay attention to.
Right. And we're going about it the wrong way, is because we are constantly trying to do this mentally and materially without the spiritual component, without being conscious of this divine self, the truth of our being. We don't have to make ourselves spiritual. We have to come out of the belief that we're not. And then he's giving us a plan, a way of doing this. Because by trying, striving, struggling, seeking, and planning, we are reinforcing the belief, I am a finite mortal being with an expiration date.
I also like that quote from Shakespeare, nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. I mean, we could probably have 2 radio shows just on that one quote.
Yeah, the other thing I really like about that is That appears in Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. Mary Baker Eddy understood this right from the onset and then took it to the next level, because when she talks about to think with God as God, and she mentions the idea we have modes of mortal thinking, we actually have to put in the tomb.
We're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. Listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Theory 1, Human Development and 8 Essential Stages of Kriya Yoga. This program is a comprehensive course that will help you get your arms around the science of Kriya Yoga. It provides a clear understanding of the goals and objectives behind yoga, along with the physics of spirituality. It includes the practices, supportive concepts of Kriya Yoga, and the process in human development, apotheosis, the process of the human becoming divine. A complete guide on how to become a human in the adult state. Get the light in your soul and experience the simplicity and joy of union with the divine. This course is available in live classes at the ashram or online with 8 videos or 4 CDs. Visit our website, www.ipdtransform.com, for more information. Welcome back. For those who are just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So let's talk more about the resurrection of Lazarus and what we can learn from it.
Yeah, for me, I really like using it as a metaphor of the resurrection to help us understand the how to convert the false to the real. I have something here that Herb Fitch wrote in Realization of Oneness, Class 14a, and I'll read it. The life of God cannot govern the mortal form. The life of God can only govern that form which is the form of the soul. And the divine power that raises you into the realization of that form cannot come to you. Jesus Christ cannot come to Lazarus until Lazarus had been put into the tomb. Until you put the false consciousness into the tomb, Christ cannot come to you. Lazarus could not come forth out of the tomb until Christ came, and Christ could not come until Lazarus had gone into the tomb. End of quote. Yeah, this is what we were talking about a little bit earlier. There's this physics of spirituality. Like attracts like, and two things can't occupy the same space at the same time. That you have to remove the false before you can create the vacuum that allows the true to resurface, to enter.
And Swami, I'm hoping that you could maybe explain a little bit more what we mean about the tomb and the stone. I know we've been talking about that in the last couple of weeks. Can you review that with us?
Yeah, again, I like what Herb Fitch says. He talks about the grave, the cave, and the stone. The cave is humanity's ignorance of the divine truth. The grave is the mortal mind. The stone is all of the human concepts, beliefs, theories, the entire collective prevailing beliefs we are all accepting and being limited by. And so in this whole scenario, once we have put the mind in the grave, then we have to roll away the stone. And this is all a metaphor for the internal work that we must be doing. And to unbox the resurrection of Lazarus, Herb Fitch also includes Martha and Mary. And Martha and Mary give us a better understanding of the interplay between the mortal mind and the soul, and the idea of going in and out. The other thing I think is important to understand here is when you get to the resurrection of Lazarus, you are in the 11th book of John, and the 10th book of John was the Good Shepherd. And so when you're looking at the veiling conditions of the mortal mind, in this way, you realize there are 12 of them. The hero's journey, the idea of the labors and tasks of Hercules, the 12 labors he had to overcome, that 12, and Herb tells you 12 is the number for the Christ. Once we have gone through these 12 veils and we have overcome them, then of course we are receptive to the presence of the Christ.
When you talk about the 12 veils, is it the 12 veils that have to be done consecutively, or is this kind of like a moving target? We're in and out of the veils all the time.
Yeah, for me, I really like the idea of faithful and orderly with the objects of sense. If you don't have what Mary Baker Eddy suggested, a proper sense of the infinite. In Kriya Yoga, we use the zodiac. We use the 12 signs of the zodiac. We use the 7 chakras or the 7 personal planets. And we have a template that gives us an organized way of gathering all of this information. Because I always think back of that time when I was traveling with a friend of mine who was a pilot, and he had a checklist. Before he started his plane, he would go over the intricate details of every one of those things on that list before we would even start the plane. And if you have a spiritual practice, the idea of knowing yourself in the way that you're created, understanding the interplay between things visible and tangible, things invisible and tangible, and the invisible, intangible omnipresence. This idea of educating thought up to spiritual apprehension becomes very useful. And if you've got an organized way of knowing yourself in the way that you are created, then you've got an organized way of approaching these obstructions. The idea of time. Well, that's just one word, but time is broken down into now and then. And so as you start to come out of thinking with your rational mind, thinking with your material senses, and you start to graduate to thinking with divine mind, like Mary Baker Eddy said, to think with God as God. Well, if God is out of time, for God, every moment is always. It's not even now, it's always. There's no then and now, there's always. And even again, the other idea of space. For mortal sense, space has here and there. But for God, everything is everywhere, always. And we have to start to be able to comprehend what that's going to look like when we come out of the limitations of the mortal mind and we start to perceive things with divine mind, with the mind that is too pure to behold iniquity.
Well, I have a question about a quote from Herb Fitch, and he says, if you continue to believe in the existence of that which God did not create, you're not putting Lazarus, the false consciousness, in the tomb. I think I understand that, but let's talk more about this existence. What can you tell our listeners about that?
Yeah, this is what we've been talking about. It's a real stretch to understand what you are perceiving in your 5 material senses is the veil. This is even beyond what Orthodox religion is saying. It's closer, I think, to what science is telling us. When Einstein was on the planet, people thought if you weren't looking at things, they were there. But now science is saying, no, that's not right. What we're calling reality is observation dependent. And so we're catching up to what Mary Baker Eddy discovered, but not as quickly, I think, as we want to be. And to help answer this question, I have another soundbite from Herb Fitch, Realization of Oneness, Class 14A. And if anybody's interested in the full audio file, you can get this at mysticalprinciples.com, and I'll play it.
We're removed from the hypnotism of the mind. Now, you'll find it necessary that you put this world into your mind consciously, because that's how you're going to find the soul realm. As the mind and its false creation, the world, are buried in the silence of your realization of the ever-present, invisible, divine life as the one and only, the only creator, the only power, the only source, the only cause, the unwillingness to accept that there can be a second creation other than spirit itself, a second power other than spirit, a power to create lack and limitation, a power to create sickness. And you find you are taking your world and putting it through your resurrection consciousness. The world moves through your resurrection consciousness. What comes out? Lazarus reborn. The spiritual universe appears where the world had seemed to be, because your resurrection consciousness liberates you from the false sense of a world that never was. The complete myth, mind, matter, body, world, and all that it contains, never moves into your resurrection consciousness. It stops there. And all that appears to you is life governing and projecting its own divine image. Darkness goes into your resurrection consciousness, and only light becomes visible. We're to stand there. We're to look at the claims of the world, not from the consciousness of Lazarus who went into the tomb, but from the consciousness of Lazarus who reappeared. Now let's look at Lazarus another way. What made him reappear? What divine power released the false? It was the life of Christ, revealing that it was the life of Lazarus, unseparated by distance, which was a time concept of man, unseparated by mortal mind, undivided. That one life of Christ, which was in one city, also came forth in another city, so that the life of Christ in one city came forth as the life of Christ in Bethany. And it was proven there that the life of Christ, Jesus, was the life of Lazarus.
So Swami Herb says that Jesus is the life of Lazarus. Can you describe that a bit more for us?
Yeah, I think we have to start to understand is all life is the life of God. All life is the life of Christ. There is only one life. And we give it location with our mortal sense of this one perfect divine life, which, again, is a hypnotic state. We're in a trance. We believe that we're separate. But in truth, there's only one life, and it's eternal life. It's changeless. It's perfect. But we must be conscious of it in order to activate it in experience. And then at the same time, he's telling you that you can't be conscious of a finite mortal sense of life and be conscious of the truth of your being. And what you discover is, once you put the false sense in the tomb and you have this resurrection consciousness, then the light of that divine principle will reveal this truth. Life is perfect. It always was. It always will be.
So what you're saying is making that distinction between idea and thought, and then like you say, that's how we unite and stand.
Right, and then it becomes a practice we employ. When you see a person, a place, or a thing, you know that it is divine consciousness appearing as. And you're piercing through the limited mental image, and you are being a faithful witness to this spiritual fact. In that spiritual realization, you're out of the veils, time, space, concept, belief, thinking, human will, personal sense, and you know the truth. Life is perfect.
Well, it is time to end the program for today. Listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. At the bottom of every page, there's plenty of buttons there for you to select to further your spiritual development, as well as the Swami Says recent posts. With that, Swami, any final words about today's program?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance, get the light in your soul, and live in spiritual truth. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton along with Swami Jayananda signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.